It's like...
I don't know, who chooses the playlist also?
Was this on her kind of mixtape when she was 21?
Dave, during the 1997 UK general election, the Labour Party, that was a Labour Party song,
yes.
as their campaign theme,
I remember it.
No,
we
were too young.
Well. But now, listen to the Tories playing it in Birmingham.
Yeah, something once Labour turned Tory.
Yes, like being, for instance, the party of business. Maybe is it the Labour Party now, who are more business friendly?
Yeah, we'll try and explore whether you can interchange them, especially in this chaos.
So the Tory party conference in Birmingham's wrapped this week, and our reporters on the ground tell us that it was one of the most chaotic and kind of disrupted conferences that anyone can remember.
Yeah, we have a great piece by Kitty Donaldson really going through the atmosphere at the Tory party conference and how different it was from Labour.
Yeah, and this is not the kind of celebration of a new administration, bearing in mind they're all turning up there with a record lead for the opposition Labour Party.
I'm Francine Lacqua.
And I'm David Merritt.
And this is In the City, Bloomberg's podcast connecting you to the stories at the heart of the City of London.
So this week, did Liz Truss's rally cry work for the City of London?
Well, it's been a wild first month for Liz Truss's government. It's seen at least £300 billion wiped out from the combined value of stock and bond markets in the UK.
So we're going to start with a conversation with Bloomberg's editor-in-chief and our boss, John Micklethwait. He was in Birmingham and then flew here to New York, and he was there for the start of the conference, testing the temperature of the Tories.
Always high stakes when you interview your boss.
Exactly.
And Lord Bilimoria, the former chair of Confederation of British Industry, active crossbench member of the House of Lords, Chancellor of the University of Birmingham, and founder of the global beer brand Cobra Beer. Dave, I also spoke with Tiina Lee, the chief executive for the UK and Ireland at Deutsche Bank, and I asked her first what she made of her meeting with the Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, and also whether she'd put more investment in the UK.
John, you were in Birmingham on the ground this week. I mean, we're in America now. I mean, the whole thing seemed pretty bad, lurching from bad headline to next. Was that what did it feel like on the ground?
I think it felt like that. I think it felt like a party that thought that things were going to get better, and they've ended up being pretty disastrously worse. And I think the underlying big problem for the Tories is that the Tories have always been the party of business, of sound money, of all the things like that. And the problem with the mini budget is that it basically destroyed, or certainly severely damaged, that reputation for sound money and for being good with business. And the problem about those things is that it opens up much more room for Labour. And I think the degree to which this was an own goal, yes, there are extraneous factors. Yes, there's the fact you've got the war in Ukraine. Yes, there's central banks everywhere raising interest rates. But the idea you're going to push through a pro-growth budget, a pro-growth agenda, when there is real problems in terms of interest rates in particular, looks ever harder. I
mean, listening to her speech, she categorised anyone who disagreed with her and Kwasi Kwarteng as the anti-growth coalition.
Economic growth makes us strong at home and strong abroad. And we need an economically sound and secure United Kingdom. And that will mean challenging those who try to stop growth. I will not allow the anti-growth coalition to hold us back.
So if you don't believe that slashing taxes is going to goose the economy, you're somehow sort of against. I mean, how do you...
I think that's very difficult. I think the most interesting thing to me almost for the past 10 days is the number of natural capitalists, entrepreneurs, people in the city, a wide variety of people from whom I've heard nothing other than enthusiasm for cutting taxes. And in general, these people do want to cut taxes, who were appalled by the 45p to 40p, or 45p to 40p reduction. Because for two reasons. Firstly, they did actually strangely feel quite guilty about it, They thought it was wrong when other people were going through great poverty and all the deprivations of energy. But secondly, they thought it just wasn't. It was making the whole thing unsellable.
Yeah.
And so it built on it
politically
repeatedly.
kind of incompetent there, right? Just not.
It was
seeing.
immensely incompetent to try and do it without the OBR numbers, without all these different things, and it gave the impression that this was sort of amateur Thatcherism.
Right, right. So that kind of fractiousness in the cabinet, and we've had various members of the cabinet off the records telling our reporters, that the Truss project is kind of doomed, and this conference was supposed to be about kind of setting her up for success, but it seems to have done the opposite, hasn't it? There's just going to be more infighting.
You're in a situation where you have two categories. You have some of the big beasts from the Johnson era who are very cross with what happened. Grant Shapps, Michael Gove, all these people who made it extremely clear that they didn't regard the budget as conservative, and actually with quite a lot of credibility said that Margaret Thatcher wouldn't have either.
Right.
So that was part one. But then secondly, even within the cabinet, and you are talking about a relatively small gene pool of people who are in that particular zone, even within that, there are people who are cross, who are jumping around the place, and at least privately will talk about, this can't go on like this.
John, do you think there was a belief, I guess, during COVID that some of the policies put in place by the previous Tory government, that they were too much like Labour, that there was a confusion between the parties and what they stood for?
I think there was. I think that's a legitimate point. I mean, basically, to the extent that the Conservatives have generally been people who are on the small state side of the equation, and Labour's been on the big state. What happened during COVID, as does during most wars. Remember, Winston Churchill was Prime Minister during the Second World War when Britain spent way beyond its means. But during wars, that people understand the need for bigger government. It's afterwards that it gets harder. What's quite interesting is if you look back, you look at the current rhetoric around the energy crisis, where what the government effectively is saying, look, please, let us help. Let us give you money, limit your petrol bill, limit your gas bill. You compare that with the rhetoric in previous energy crises, which was much more, now is the time to share a bath. And you will find more, elements within the Conservative Party who are drifting back towards that and saying, help, government is getting too big. But the supreme sort of lack of skill of this particular event was to somehow lose those people as well.
And the polls are astonishing. The biggest ever lead for Labour, some up to 33% or so. So yes, as you said, people in the hall might be cheering her to the rafters, but the public have made up their mind, haven't they? And you talked about opening up a space for Labour. I mean, they've got to be odds on now to win the next election, haven't they?
I think at the moment they're clearly the favourites. I think there are two arguments put forward. The second one, which is going to sound rather pathetic, but I will make nonetheless. The first one is, look, really in the end, that is not a lead for Labour, it's a loss for the Conservatives. If the Conservatives get their house in order, a lot of those things will narrow. The second one, which sounds pathetic, it isn't, is this idea of events. British politics has changed so rapidly over the past 5 years. You've had Theresa May, you've had Boris Johnson in trouble, out of trouble, winning an enormous landslide, and then in trouble again and then got rid of. You've had people going up and down like everything. And so their argument, and you hear this both from allies of Truss and from deeply committed opponents of her, is look, something could happen in the next 6-7 months that changes the dynamic. But that's at some point that becomes a vain hope.
John, so after listening to Liz Truss at the Tory party conference, and after the tumultuous 2 weeks that we've had with the U-turns, do you actually think that Labour could be more business-friendly?
I think that is the truly horrifying question for the Conservatives, is do you get a degree more certainty from Labour? In some ways not good certainty. The certainty is that they will definitely keep the 45p rate whilst the Conservatives probably get rid of it. But do you begin to get, is there an element whereby you're going to get a more responsible, even-handed? I mean, Keir Starmer is nothing if not boring. And at this precise moment, I think business needs somebody who they think they can just get on with things. You've had Boris Johnson jumping in every available way, but actually not doing anything as spectacularly sort of destructive as what happened with the mini budget.
And the unpredictability of it, right, wasn't it? It was the fact that he sprung those cuts by surprise and hadn't even cleared it with the cabinet. And I think, I guess Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer are going to be offering what they would present as a bit more certainty and stability for business, right?
Definitely. Speaking to a colleague from America, not from Bloomberg, from outside, but he said the whole meeting members of the Truss administration really reminded him of the sort of second term of a presidential thing, when you go to the White House and a lot of the good people have left and you're left with the others. You're left with the people who are just hanging around to the end of this presidency. And there is an element of that about this current administration. Kind of vibe. It's got a lame duck vibe, and that's not a good place to be.
So what's the prescription for the Labour Party and its leader, Keir Starmer? Do they need to be more like the Tony Blair administration to attract investment and to attract business?
I mean, my instinct, having seen somebody from the Blair administration quite recently, is that Starmer probably still needs to do one more thing that shows he is clearly in the centre. I don't think that merely saying you're no longer anti-Semitic, it sort of counts as a radical reform. In terms of what he's actually done, yes, if you look at what he was talking about this week, he has, they agreed to some of the tax cutting stuff. So that shows centrism. He feels centrist, but the quite a lot of the Labour platform is still relatively left-wing. You mentioned Rachel Reeves. Her commitment was to go and spend the money that Kwasi Kwarteng was going to give away. So sort of fiscally, it's not entirely clear that that's clever. She's claiming that she would get the money from non-DOMs, but Labour has to watch it. The two things. On the one hand, you have the Tories who are used to winning, and Labour who are used to losing. And there is an element within Labour that I think there's still a degree of fear from people on the left that they could still mess it up. But God, this is one of the great opportunities of our times for them.
John, thank you so much. John Micklethwait there, our Bloomberg editor-in-chief.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Lord Bilimoria, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, you wear different hats. You were formerly, of course, at the Confederation of British Industry. You're in the House of Lords. You're also a very famous business founder. So what were the last 2-3 weeks like?
A month ago, we had a new prime minister. And we had a new prime minister and a new monarch in 1 week. And then this mini budget. Now, I hate this term mini budget. There was anything but mini about it. It was a major budget.
Yeah. It was an earthquake of budget.
It was huge. Now, the first reaction from business said, this is great news for business, cutting taxes. Because I've said for a long time to the previous Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, going back to February last year, right, over 1.5 years ago.
As long as you can fund them.
Well, no, I said 1.5 years ago, I said to Rishi, do not put up taxes. Because if you increase taxes, it will hamper the recovery and will hamper growth. What happens? Taxes go up and up and up, and we've got the highest tax burden in 70 years. So you look back at the situation we're in now. We're faced with these huge challenges, huge headwinds, uncertainty continues, and yet you look back in history and always say the best way to predict the future is look at the past.
Right. And
13 years ago, before the financial crisis, we had interest rates on average at 5%. We had a growth rate of about 2.5% of our country. And what have we had since financial crisis? Over a decade of zero growth, right, declining productivity, and interest rates are almost zero.
But this budget, mini, earthquake, whatever you want to call it, was a mistake. And I don't know whether it was too fast or badly put together. If you look at how much it's taken off markets in the UK and what even rating agencies are now saying about the UK.
So the mistakes were as follows. One, to announce the bankers' bonuses, removing the cap. At a time like this, there's nothing that, in principle, it's the right thing to do to make the City of London more competitive. Absolutely, but not at a time like this. The perception is wrong. 45% rate of tax. Again, absolutely the right thing to remove that. It should not be there. It's been 40% with Margaret Thatcher, 40% with Tony Blair, 40% with Gordon Brown, John Major. And it was Gordon Brown who put it up to 50% just before he lost the election. But George Osborne didn't bring it down to 40%. He wanted to, but there was a coalition government. He brought it 45. So we shouldn't have the 45. But to remove that at a time like this, not the right time to do it. Third mistake, which was the Office of Budget Responsibility, not to have a OBR report backing up what you were doing. That was the third mistake.
I mean, we're going to get that OBR report probably in the next few weeks, Lord Bilimoria. But those two measures, the other two fiscal measures you're talking about, the higher rate of tax and the bonus cap, those don't move the needle on the amount of borrowing that the government's going to have to make. And that's the verdict the markets have taken, haven't they? It's on the much bigger tax cuts, which you're saying were still the right thing to do.
Absolutely, because if you think of it, what has a decade of austerity got us? It's got us nowhere. No growth, low productivity. What if high taxes, the highest tax burden in 70 years, got us nowhere? So what is the alternative? The alternative is carry on with what we had. Well, that's not going to work. You tax people more and more, you're not going to grow, and you're going to hamper the recovery. And people are suffering enough. And what was missing in the mini budget, by the way, was where is the help for small businesses to survive this winter?
Yeah, but 40% for the high earners does not help small businesses. I mean, is this, the Prime Minister just trying to speak to her constituency, which are the Tory membership, the base that elected her?
What you've got to do is look at broadly the economy in making Britain the best place to invest, a magnet for inward investment. We have traditionally been the second or third largest recipient of inward investment in the world. Now, you can't be a magnet for inward investment if you have high taxes. You've got to have a competitive rate of tax. 40%, by the way, is still high. As a top rate of income tax, it is still high.
I'm just going to read a quote. We have a story leading our Bloomberg UK website from Liberum Capital saying the feedback we've got from investors is that they consider the UK uninvestable as long as there is such government chaos. I mean, that's the problem, isn't it, Lord Bilimoria? Like all of the upheaval and this very dramatic impact in this budget, it's spooking investors around the world, isn't it?
And this is the whole point. In life, I've realized time after time, it's not just what you do, it's how you do it.
And when.
And of course, the timing of it as well. If this had been done and presented in the right way, the markets would not have been spooked. I go back to it. Were the markets spooked when we spent £400 billion that we did not have? We didn't have that £400 billion. We had to borrow the £400 billion. That didn't spook the markets. This has spooked the markets because of the way it's happened. Interest rates going up, they will probably go back up to the level of 5% in due course, but not in one go like this. In one go like this, it's devastating. Devastating for mortgage holders, devastating for businesses. So there's absolutely the effect of what has happened with the mini budget is the wrong thing altogether. Nobody wanted it, but the intention of what they were trying to do is just they went about it the wrong way.
The perception now, so 14 days, we had the Labour Party conference and the Tory Party conference, is that the Tories are in disarray. The atmosphere was daggards and cloaks and no one really got along and they weren't really sure how to find the footing. Do you think, Lord Bilimoria, that the Labour Party is now the more business-friendly party of the UK?
What everyone wants to see at a time like this is the least well-off, the people to be protected, to be helped. And when you have a debate about whether benefits are going to go up in line with wages or earnings or whether they're going to go up in line with inflation, I mean, how can you even think about that? That's got to be done in line with inflation because the poor people are struggling with energy. They're struggling with food. If you look at food prices, and this 10%, by the way, inflation figure is a very misleading figure. I mean, my input costs in my business in Cobra Beer have gone up by well over 25%. I can't pass that on to the consumer. Wage increases are nowhere near keeping up with inflation. Now, if you try and have wages keeping up with inflation, you'll have a wage spiral inflation. Where's the end to that? You keep putting up wages, prices go up, then you have to put up wages even more. It's a vicious cycle. So there is a huge challenge over here. We've got strikes that are happening more and more now. We've got leadership. What you're talking about is we need leadership, we need direction, we need confidence, we need certainty.
Where is it?
And now the government is trying to do that, but after this mini budget from the 23rd of September onwards, they're unable to. And the speech, Liz Truss's speech just now at the end of the conference, was trying to say, please, let's focus on growth. And these are my priorities. Allow me to try and implement it. Well, let's see if she's given a chance to implement it. And Labour, by the way, they're being very clear. They're reaching out to business. Keir Starmer's reaching out to business. Rachel Reeves, the shadow chancellor, is reaching out to business. We know historically that a Labour government can be very business friendly. I mean, Tony Blair's government, quite frankly, in the last 2 decades, has probably been the most business-friendly government. If you look at the capital gains tax rates, if you look at entrepreneurs' relief, if you look at the top rate of tax, in every way, they were very, very business-friendly.
And, there is that feeling, isn't there, of, back in 1996, 1997, with Labour really ahead in the polls, Tony Blair, the Prime Minister in waiting, courting business and having to sort of get real about the fact they're lining up for government. And, looking at the polls now, this sort of record lead for Labour, business people like yourself, surely you must be preparing for a Keir Starmer premiership.
Well, an election is going to happen in a maximum of 2 years' time. And that's the hurry that Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng are in. They know they haven't got much time to turn things around. And especially after what's happened since the 23rd of September, they've got to rebuild confidence. Confidence from the business community here, confidence with the consumers and the voters, and also confidence from the international community and the markets that they can trust this growth strategy and investment.
Lord Bilimoria, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
So, Dave, I had this great conversation with the chief executive of Deutsche Bank here in the UK and Ireland, Tiina Lee, one of the most powerful female bankers in London. We talked about the City of London, we talked about regulation and whether this chaos, she knows personally also, the Chancellor, whether this chaos means that some clients were not investing in the UK.
Yeah, and the idea that the UK in the last few weeks has become, by some views, uninvestable with the amount of money that's been wiped off markets.
First of all, what's your take on the UK right now? You sat next to the Chancellor. Yep. There's obviously a credibility problem that was played on the markets. Can they get back on their feet?
I think they can. I mean, there's been a lot of sound and fury that we have seen over the last 10 days. And I think the work that the Bank of England has done in terms of announcing their gilt purchase scheme has clearly calmed markets. And we've seen that in where sterling has moved to levels where it was before the mini budget. And gilt yields have obviously stabilised, even though at much higher levels. So I think we have a pause here. The question obviously is around the medium-term financial plan. Yep. That is on November the 23rd. That will be coming obviously with the OBR assessment, which I think will be key. And that was one of the things which spooked markets because that was lacking with the mini budget statement. So I think for me, the question is, given that the Bank of England will conclude or allegedly conclude their purchase scheme by October the 14th, what happens between now and the 23rd? So much of that is around, I think, communication with the markets. That was missing. Which is strange because they also put the markets or certainly the city at the kind of the forefront of their plan. That's right. So I think that started to happen. We saw the coordinated statements from the Chancellor and from the Bank of England early last week. The purchase scheme was helpful, and also maybe some of the statements which have been coming out of the Chancellor with regard to his commitment to fiscal discipline. When you speak to a lot of your clients, are they ready to put more money in the UK in terms of investments, or is it a little bit of a wait and see because of the shock of the last 10 days? I would say that some clients are pausing. Yeah. And I think that's reasonable. As I said, we have a period of time between now and November the 23rd. We have seen we have seen sterling depreciate somewhat against the US dollar. That's now recovered to about the 112, 113 level, which is where it was before the mini budget. But obviously, I think we should be very mindful of the value of sterling because that does have an ultimate impact in terms of the value of UK PLC. Yeah. Tiina, thank you so much, as always, for joining us. Tiina Lee, their Chief Executive Officer for the UK and Ireland at Deutsche Bank.
Thanks for listening to this week's In the City. We will be back next week.
In London.
Yes, on location.
On location. In the meantime, if you like our show, please head on over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can rate, review and subscribe.
And of course, please, if you have not already, sign up for our daily newsletter, the Readout with Allegra Stratton on bloomberg.com/newsletters, or check out the show notes for a link. And this episode was hosted by me, David Merritt.
And me, Francine Lacqua.
It was produced by Summer Sadi.
Special thanks to John Micklethwait, Lord Bilimoria, Tiina Lee and James Woolcock.